Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen is 1, where we scan the world's health professions literature, education literature for you and bring it to your practice. This is Jason with you, and today I have the usual Papers crew. Welcome, Lara.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Linda.
Hey there.
And welcome, John.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening.
So it's Linda's turn today for a paper, and we're going to do a little EPA action. So over to you, Linda.
Thanks so much. And I'm actually doing this paper because Lara told me I had to. As you guys know, I gave you an option of 3 or 4 papers, and Lara likes this one so much.
No, I didn't like it. I have feelings about it.
I will just interpret your email as you liked it so much you wanted us to do it.
I didn't know we had to listen to what Lara told us, so I've been just sending all those to the trash.
My
junk file.
I usually do the opposite.
Well, I in fairness, I did ask for your opinion. So I'm entitling this episode, "Should Health Professions Education Training for PhDs be based on entrustable professional activities?" The article is by Gandomkar et al., including in the et al. Ola Tenkate, the father of entrustable professional activities. And the title is "Expectations for PhDs in Health Professions Education, an International EPA-framed Modified Delphi Study. It's an Advances in Health Sciences Education in 2022. So just a little bit of background here. We know that HPE, Health Professions Education, is becoming increasingly professionalized. Before you can get a job, even sometimes as a program director, they want to know if you had some training, if you have an advanced degrees. And for those working in HPE, either in HPE research units or to support other areas of medical education, such as curriculum development or assessment, people are being required to have an advanced degree. Having said that, many current holders of PhDs who work in HPE come from other fields. I mean, look at Lara, or look at many of the other people who I work with. They're anthropologists, sociologists, cognitive psychologists. They don't have a degree in HPE per se, and they bring the most amazing different perspectives. We also have to say that doctoral programs in HPE vary. Doctoral programs in anything vary from somebody doing original research and developing new knowledge and completing a dissertation in a specific area, to being exposed to a variety of research methods, theories, curriculum development strategies, and policies. So basically, there is no one right way of doing things. In comes competency-based education. And these authors propose that an entrustable professional activity, or EPA-like framework, such as used in medical education, could be used to identify or guide areas of competency for both PhD students and PhD graduates. In competency-based education, as to quote my friend Jason, you start with the end in mind. In this case, by asking, what will the holder of a PhD do? And then design the learning around these expectations using EPAs. An EPA is a task of a professional that can be entrusted to an individual once they've demonstrated the required competencies to carry out the activity unsupervised. And while developed for medical professionals, these authors say that the concept was deemed suitable to conceptualize the work field of PhDs in HPE, although they don't really give any rationale for this statement. In fact, one author in Iran, there was one consensus study done with a Delphi that clarified the HB PhD expectations for that country, and they produced 34 EPAs in 3 areas: education development, research and scholarship, and education management. So these authors say their purpose is to use those Iranian EPAs as a starting point and seek a more generalized validity and a wider consensus of suitable activities for PhDs in HPE. So I'm going to stop there, and John, Jason, Lara, thoughts on this so far?
The first part I just want to flag, which we'll probably lose, and I want to start with it, is I love this idea of Iranian-Netherlands collaboration. And I think that's an interesting thing about our community in health professions education, that there's commonality that can be leveraged around the world. And it's also nice to see us moving from, hey, we're going to do this little tiny thing that happened at our one little institute and think about it this way, but let's start thinking bigger and let's start leveraging our network. I think there's a generosity amongst the scholar community and the research community. And so I just wanted to flag that and maybe redline that. The second is because this is episode 3 and there's probably only 4 of us listening to it, which actually 5. Samuel, our fearless producer, is listening. I don't like EPAs. I haven't liked EPAs from the start. Ole would know that. But I actually really like the EPA list they will subsequently develop. And I don't want to do the reveal yet. But it kind of, I see the practicality of it. And so I'm kind of surprised to hear all this. I have more things to say as I see Lara waving her hands about this. The challenge for EPAs is that you lose all of the underlying competencies. And so your bundle is so big that the nuance of what hides underneath it is lost. So yeah, having said all that, I kind of came to start this paper saying, oh my God, I can't believe that this is even an approach. And then when I got to their first table, I was like, oh, I can see a little bit of rationale there.
John. Ladies and gentlemen, John also doesn't like bunnies, puppies, or other small animals. So just take that with a grain of salt.
I like Lara's dog.
Who is yet to be named because we haven't introduced Lara's dog yet. What's Lara's dog's name, Lara?
Her name is Keisha.
Keisha. So Keisha's now on the podcast. So listen, I do like EPAs. I think EPAs work just fine for an educational design element. The big issue here is actually about professions theory. So is a PhD educator a member of a profession in the same way that EPAs have been developed for other health professions? I think that's a fundamental question. It implies that there is a set of governing rules that would be standardized across multiple practitioners, and that they're a service provider who must achieve a certain level of competence. And I'm not sure my PhD friends in health professions education would agree with all those premises. I'm not sure that we're looking to certify the competencies of PhD educators as they graduate the way we do with, say, a nephrologist. And so that's my worry about this paper.
Jason, I'm right behind you. This whole paper rests on the premise that there should be a common set of activities that any graduate with a PhD in HPE should be able to accomplish, that there are specific services they should be able to provide. And that's an assumption I just can't get behind. I have great respect for the authors. I appreciate the international collaboration, but I fear that they have the framing of the concept, the idea of what a PhD is in what you are asked to do with that degree is really not sufficiently broad in the way they are talking about it. They're looking at a very narrow, very specific scope in terms of some work of some PhDs in this field. It's not representative of all of the PhD trained scholars who work in this field. And it also, one of the things that I find a little problematic, as they talked in the introduction, part of their justification for this piece was that there were more and more PhD trained scholars being sought after and being advertised, like that's part of the requirements in job ads for different people in the field. But those job ads are of a time, they are of a place, they are of a context, and it doesn't embrace the full breadth and depth of what PhDs in the field can do. So, everything from building new knowledge to supporting leadership work, scholarly activities, service requirements, teaching responsibilities, there's all sorts of pieces to this. And every PhD trained scholar working in the field will have a different balance, a different structure, a different role. And to say that all of them need to meet these EPAs, I think, is to fundamentally misunderstand what the work is of a scholar trained with a PhD in this field. So I have great respect for the work, but I fundamentally disagree with the objective it's trying to achieve.
Boom.
So this is interesting because I agree with you, Lara, and all of you, but none of you talked about the concept of entrustability. And I just wondered what you think about whatever the task of a PhD is, bringing in that entrustability concept into that. Jason?
So I think I touched on that. It's about being a service provider, that you can say, here's a task that needs to be done. You're part of a profession, and go provide that service in the way that, we can intubate somebody or insert a chest tube or manage diabetes. Like, I'm not sure that these things are one-to-one. So it's okay if people choose that route and use these methods. I'm just not sure that they apply. I think it's a little bit different.
Oh, I totally agree. And the other thing that I find very concerning is that in the paper in various places, they try to make this rhetorical signal that they're not saying that these should be applied for all sites and all those sorts of things. But then it always comes, while we don't want to do that, there's a second half of the sentence. This could be and has a very strong, robust data behind saying these are the things we can trust PhDs to do. And it's like, again, I keep coming back to this idea. In order for this to work, in order for this to hold, you have to live in a very specific kind of space. Because if you're part of a unit, if you're part of a service unit, if you're part of a research center, your work as a health professions education PhD trained scholar, entrustment doesn't even, it's not even a concept that fits a lot of these roles.
Yep. So I'm going to go on with the methods. So the researchers use those 34 Iranian EPAs, and they did Delphi. They started with some participants who were, first of all, targeted members of the Society for Directors of Research in Medical Education. Tends to be a North American group, so they rounded out their international experts using purposive, I say that for John, purposive sampling through the authors' networks. It's really unclear whether all of these individuals were holders of PhDs or if any worked in other sort of non-HPE research education units who employ PhDs, as I mentioned before. So they approached almost 150. 18 started the Delphi, 15 finished 3 rounds, half were from the US, the rest were from various smatterings of Western countries. In the 3 rounds of the Delphi, it was a huge Delphi, and I'm actually impressed that they only lost 3 over the courses of 3 rounds. The first round, they had 240 items, basically 10 questions almost for most of those EPAs regarding the relevance of the EPA for graduates, the clarity of the title, the comprehensiveness of it, the risks in case of failure, and the appropriateness of the limitations. Following that, they revised titles, they merged some, they removed any with no content validity index, which I'll explain in a minute, and they added a question, several questions. Is it desirable that most PhDs could do this without supervision? Should this EPA be included in PhD training? And they came down to 162 items. In round 3, they removed 1 more item, and they had, in general, 1 question per EPA on the adequacy of the description, a few other questions. So it came to 45 items. Their content validity score looked at the Likert scale that they used. If the average was over 80%, it was high content validity. 50 to 80 needed work, and under 50, they tended to throw out that EPA. The outcomes, they started off with 34 in 3 categories. They ended up with 17 in 2 categories, 8 relating to research and scholarship, and 9 relating to education development. The research stuff was like knowing about qual, mixed methods, writing, publishing, presenting. Interestingly, teaching is not in there. I was quite surprised about that. And education development was all the things you might expect an educator to do, from curriculum design, faculty development, assessment, mentoring, etc. The only EPA that got high agreement that PhDs could be trusted to do this unsupervised was presenting at meetings.
Oh, doesn't that just make you... Oh.
That's awesome.
I know.
No, it's not.
No, it's not awesome.
It just speaks to this strange methods. Well, we'll get to that.
Oh, okay. And only 12 EPAs, a minority of the respondents said that they could be trusted to do it unsupervised. It suggests that the panel members had expectations for HPE PhDs that exceed the current reality. So I'm going to stop there and ask for some comments. We already know that John thinks that there's face validity on these outcomes, so I'm going to let him go last. I'll go Jason, Lara, John.
Thanks. So just on the process, I don't know about you, but when I think of Adelphi, I think of you select a group of experts and you should have some defense of why you selected them. And then you're trying to get them to a consensus on something. That's the purpose of Adelphi. It's a group consensus process. It's got some rules. And this one's interesting because it doesn't have a brainstorming phase and then a narrowing phase. It has a whole bunch of surveys about the EPAs at each stage. And the questions are different at multiple stages as I read the methods. This is unlike any Delphi I've ever read. Yes, it is a group consensus process using multiple surveys. I'm not sure I'd label it as a Delphi. It's not even a modified Delphi. It's kind of its own methodology of a bunch of surveys of a bunch of experts. So that's my first opening comment on this. Given that, they narrowed it down to a small list from a longer list, so that instead of the wisdom of crowds, this is kind of the tyranny of the election kind of thing. And it doesn't have a ton of face validity for me. Again, if you just think of your colleagues who are PhDs, there's a breadth of behaviors and things that these people are capable of doing. This is a pretty narrow list by, I think, anybody's standards. So it's kind of a shocking study from that perspective. Very provocative.
It is provocative. Jason, the extent to which I had to walk away twice when I was reading this paper and then go downstairs and talk to my husband and take the dog for a walk because I was so upset. And not upset that I'm angry. I don't want anybody to think I don't respect the science. I understand the science, but it's the implications of this work. So I'm going to point out just 2 points of these methods that I found really problematic and that made me need to leave the house for a bit. One is that they're calling this an international consensus. And if we look who is represented internationally, we have 8 Americans, 2 Dutch, 2 German, 1 Australian, 1 Brit, 1 person from the UK, 1 South African. That's a heavily Western sample. This is not international. And if you go to the SDRME, the Society for Directors of Medical Education, it's no surprise that that's what your sample is going to be. It's a group that was started in North America, and it is open internationally, but it's rooted here. And the sample of international voices, in my mind, is not sufficient to say this is a global representation. The second point I want to make is that I'm really concerned because we forced consensus. And what that means is that the things in the middle of that bell curve, we say this is what the job is. This is what we agree is. This is what the professional activity should be. But if you really want to understand what the job of a PhD trained scientist is in this field, the tails matter because the tails are real work. And it doesn't mean that those things aren't important. If the consensus of the group just happens to fall in this section, the tails are still valid. But because we're forcing consensus, because that's what Adelphi does, it makes consensus happen, you lose all that diversity. So what I feel in terms of these methods is a very culturally focused lens that cuts out diversity in terms of the work that's done by different scientists trained with PhDs. So for me, there's all kinds of red flags for the methods.
I think you want to be cautious about any results if you don't think the process gets you what you want. And I'm going to double click on what Lara said. So they approach 150, they only get 18, 15 only finish it. And there must be some kind of special attention because to go through 240 questions at round 1, you would have had me there. I think what's been lost a little bit in translation, though, is that this is not what you should achieve in your PhD. Rather, I think what they don't say as explicitly as they might want to is this is one bias group. Let's recognize what that is. Their take on what a PhD educator, the abilities and competencies they should possess, packaged as an EPA. So many PhD educators will have to go to do a postdoc in terms of acquiring things beyond what their graduate courses, their expertise in methodology, and their acquisition of research and scholarly productivity is. But when you look at the list, I don't think it is a fulsome definition, but but it's probably a minimum standard that you might think would be relevant. So it has stuff like you have methodological expertise, you can write and conduct research, you can teach, you can provide supervision and mentoring, etc. These are things that would be anticipated from taking on some kind of faculty role and would be reflected in many of the university requirements that we have. And they just do a reorg of what that looks like. It's hilarious what the consensus is from the 15. And I don't want to steal the punchline because I'm going to let you do that with your results section, Lara, or Linda. But I think the list that they start with is maybe not as off-putting to me as a non-PhD educator, because I don't see them as saying this is the entire scope or this is exclusive. And they're not saying this is what you acquire during the PhD, but this is maybe what would be expected from a group that I think is not representative broadly of the HPE community, of what a PhD educator, the types of different roles and the types of different abilities and skills they might bring.
Linda, I need you to get to the results because I got more opinions. I'm trying to be very respectful here.
Can we just do one thing, though? Can we just do a big shout out to the participants who did 3 rounds of 240 items? That is not a bunch of emerge docs answering that survey.
No. There was or internists. It was 240, 145, and 45. So a little bit less, but still. So I did actually give you a sneak peek of the results in that 17 EPAs in 2 categories, research and scholarship and net development, were what they came up with. And I misspoke when I said that teaching wasn't one of them. In fact, teaching and facilitating learning was one of them. Which I think we'll recognize. What I thought was interesting were some of the conclusions. The papers, podcasts, people will not see Lara, who is rolling her eyes here. So the authors say that EPAs have been proposed for other domains like teaching, and they're adding to this expansion from clinical medicine, but giving a looser use of the definition. I would say it's definitely loose because of the entrustment issues. They didn't apply formal methods to evaluate the validity of the EPAs, and I quote here, acknowledge that supervision of work reflected in these EPAs is different than in patient care. And in defining PhDs in HPE, they have stretched the applicability of the concept. So I think I have to agree they've stretched it. So my question is, can the concept of entrustment truly be applied to the tasks of a PhD in HPE? And there's one very short paragraph that I do like in this paper, but I don't think it necessarily goes along with the rest of the paper. They say, PhDs may be regarded as individuals who have matured through a process of learning, working, and discovering that may make them ready to be tasked with obligations they have not encountered before, but that they can tackle mostly because of their experience with scientific thinking, general acquaintance with the literature, experience with some research approaches, and only tangentially familiar with other research methods. Even in domains not deeply touched upon by PhD training, graduates may be trusted to develop the capability to do that scholarly work. Okay, you're still rolling your eyes, Lara. I'm going to give you a second in a second, but it's not even a question of entrustment. Your training in PhD was in one thing. You're working in a totally different area, because you have that rigorous scientific background to do it, and you learned on the job, I'm assuming. Go ahead. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, Linda. But what I want to say here is I want to be really clear that I have a bias, because according to these EPAs, and if you are of this opinion, I respect it. I respectfully disagree, but I would not be qualified to be a PhD in HPE right now. I'm not qualified. And the other part and that's fine. If maybe you don't think I am qualified, and that's okay. You can write to us and let us know, and I can take it. I got broad shoulders. It's okay. But here's the thing. If you look at these lists of EPAs, what you actually have here is a list of expertise that at the present moment require you to do a PhD in different fields. Like, one of the things you need to be able to do is one of the EPAs is conducting qualitative educational research. Another is conducting quantitative educational research. Right now, those are two different degrees. You can't get both of them in one PhD. There's also conduct educational needs assessment. There's a whole area of PhD research. There's a whole area of science about assessment. What you've got here is a list that any one PhD, you can't be sufficiently robust and skilled and thoughtful and trained in each of these EPAs in one degree, which then leads me to fear that what we have here is a list of all the things we're asking people to do, and they're not going to be able to do any of them with deep expertise because there's too much, it's too broad. You can't be a deep expert in each of these 17 things. It's not possible unless you're going to go do all these PhDs. Like, you're going to have to be, one person's going to have 17 PhDs. My fear is what we have here is a list to be average, to be a little, not even average, a little dangerous because you know a little bit about a lot.
So, John, Jason, what are your thoughts on Lara's rant?
I appreciate what Lara's talking about, particularly around the methodologic expertise. You can't do mixed methods, you can't do qual, you can't do quant and expect everybody to have that. You're asking for a silver bullet, and I think that's really what you're getting appropriately pushing back on. The part that I find hilarious in the I can't believe someone put this into a paper is after they got from 29 down to 17, they didn't believe that anybody actually could do it. And so here's a line of reasoning that maybe my conspiratorial lens is showing through. We know what the academic rank of the Delphi participants are, but we don't actually know who they are, meaning, are they directors of centers? Are they PhD trained? Are they clinicians? So what kind of unconscious or perhaps conscious bias are they bringing to this? Because what's hilarious is, with the exception of one thing that had 85% agreement, they don't believe that anybody can do any of these things. Like, there's 5 elements out of 17 where they say 50% of us think you could probably do this. It's a non sequitur. There's nothing here to be added because they put together a list of this is what we should do, but we actually don't think anybody can do it. It just doesn't hold together. It's illogical at the end. It's
a list of skills you need like a whole staff to have.
Or, I don't know, it just doesn't, it's a non sequitur. You say, here's what you should be able to do, but we don't think you can do it. I don't know how you start with that.
I have nothing to add, Linda.
Okay. Let us go on to methodology and educational impact. Methodology on a highly validated scale of 1 to 5. Lara, John, Jason.
I'm gonna give it 2.15.
Stop.
If this is your new thing on the new podcast, I'm considering, like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Dude,
I'm gonna do something
your
mean.
new thing has been, I'm going to double click on that. I have no idea where you thought that was a good idea. I'm going to double click on that.
All right, I'm going to redline. Do you like redline better?
I don't like red line either. No, it's bad. Anyway, I stand by 2.1, whatever I said.
There's an exchange rate that's 2. This is a 2. And it's only because they lost me with their Delphi method. Their conclusions are the conclusions, but they lost me. And the premise is something I think that should have been discussed more up front. It's a 2.
I struggle. First off, my joke is, have you ever heard of a Delphi method just called a Delphi method? Because everybody says it's a modified Delphi method. To the point, I went to Wikipedia and said, dear Wikipedia, tell me what a Delphi method is. And say, these are the general principles, which they all have. And so I guess everything is a modified. It's like saying, we did a modified experiment because our experiment, but it's just I don't know what you're going to say about that. As a Delphi, the 2 critical parts is, I think the selection of their so-called experts is not a selection. It's these people couldn't get off the email list, and somehow their desire to fill out very long forms scratched an itch. And, we can quibble a little bit about that. And then the second part is just the feasibility of structuring it. So, or using what they have as a starting point to validate. I don't know. I'm going to give it a 2.5.
Oh, look at you.
2.64.
No, you do not. You do not get to give me a
I
hard
am
time
doing that
with
because
the
I know as soon as
decimal
I
point.
do the decimal points, you're going to stop doing the
No,
decimal points.
I'm doing decimal points for the rest of this podcast.
Oh,
For the rest of our lives together.
See
It's
you in
decimal point life.
hell.
As an aside to our listeners, if you're looking for some really great references on doing Delphi's or CGTs, NGTs, or RAND method, look up the work by Susan Humphrey-Murtaugh. She has done an excellent job describing these methodologies, made it very accessible. There's even Amy guides.
Thank you to our new Decimal Daisy. That's what I'm going to start calling you. So I got to say, I'm giving it a 2 for a couple of reasons. It's a highly modified Delphi, if it's still a Delphi, and also because of the selection of the people. And maybe they know more than they're telling us, but I don't have enough to say anything. Okay, education impact. We'll go backwards. That's Lara,
That was so 5 minutes ago.
John,
That's forward.
Jason. I think
I was last. John will go first.
I don't love EPAs, and so I hate coming up with EPAs. It reminds me of the very first EPA study that was done on anesthetists. So Ole's very first study of anesthetists showed that they wouldn't graduate any of their senior anesthesia trainers, which speaks to this whole phenomenon of trust. It's good enough for somebody else, but I have such a high standard that I can't trust anyone to do it ever as good as me, which I think might be one of the flaws that we're experiencing in the literature. That's not the flaw in the actual implementation in the real world, but we're seeing these for these 2 first papers around EPAs in different streams. I don't know if I'm going to use as much. A 2 for me.
So, again, the old criteria of, will this trigger a conversation? I think it would trigger a hot conversation. I mean, Lara had an opinion about it. So that, this is a useful paper for that. But is it going to change anybody's practice? Like, I'm not going to change our local school's PhD program based on this. So I think it is a 2. Even though we've been really critical so far, we do give out numbers on the right-hand side of this very important scale. But I am giving it a 2.
So I'm going to give this a 2.2. And I'm giving it a 2.2.
I forgot that I was going to do decimals. I forgot.
Oh, no, we're doing decimals forever.
Minutes.
It's just like a whole thing now. But I fundamentally, completely, utterly disagree with the premises of this paper. The fact that it could spawn a really heated debate and that the debate might move us forward, for me, then it has merit, hence the 2.2. But I give that with a very serious red flag caution. Please don't use this as the stick against which you are going to measure all of the PhD trained scientists working in health professions education, because it's a list that no one person can fulfill. It's just impossible.
so. I'm going to give it a 2.5, seeing we're all doing decimals, mainly because of the debate. I have grave misgivings about the entrustment concept. Even if it's, as I quote again, graduates may be trusted to develop a capability to do the scholarly work. I think that's not the same as entrustment. And you look for somebody you want to hire because they're going to work in a research unit, because you need a sociologist, because you need a quantitative methodologist, because you want someone who can do something with assessment, not because they have all of these things. All right, that's it. That's it. And take a breath, Lara.
Oh, no, seriously, it just makes me worry that we don't respect the science, that if we think everybody can do all of this, if one person can do all of this, we don't respect the science of it, the depth and breadth of knowledge behind it. I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm going to go have a drink of wine.
Right. Okay. So thanks to your papers people who have listened to this. We appreciate you coming back. If you want to reach us, you could do it through our email or have a look at the website. And we shall see you next week for more papers.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.